Yeah,
You
we're
hear anything about
live.
tariffs recently, Luke?
Yeah, a few things. It seems to be all
Couple
recovering lately,
there.
but yeah, they're pretty big.
News has been very busy again this week. The last time we talked, we were just finishing up on a quick start and even quicker stop to tariffs on Colombia after they did something that Trump mildly didn't like.
Right.
As those were going out, then top of people's minds was, all right, well, you said February 1st. What about the Canada and Mexico tariffs? That's when he originally said they would go into place. People were like really curious about that. People want to know what was going on because he really didn't say anything else about it. That evening, when he was signing more orders, he was asked that question one last time, and he had kind of a funny response, I thought.
Mr. President, is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
Not a negotiating tool?
No, it's not. No, it's a pure economic. We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them. And in one case, they're sending massive amounts of fentanyl, killing hundreds of thousands of people a year with the fentanyl. And in the other two cases, they're making it possible for this poison to get in, number one. And number two, we have big deficits, and it's something we're doing, and we'll possibly very substantially increase it or not. We'll see how it is, but it's a lot of money coming to the United States. As you know, we have about a $200 billion deficit with Canada, getting close to $200 billion. They've treated us very unfairly. And I say, why should we be subsidizing Canada? It's wonderful. I have so many friends in Canada. It's a great place.
Is there a concession
But,
you're looking for, sir?
No, we're not looking for a concession. And we'll just see what happens.
So that sort of captures the tone that he sets right off the bat here.
Yeah, Dan, kind of making us look dumb because we're over here saying how like, oh, this is totally just a political thing. They're trying to extract what they want. Now he's saying like, oh, and that's where her question seemed to be coming from. That's what we were telling you. That's what my understanding.
He said it's a purely economic thing. So we can see where his head's at on this, and he's using this point about fentanyl and drug trafficking as one of the primary reasons for implementing this, rather than, he's saying it's purely economic, but also clearly
it's like a punishment. I mean, if you were listening to it, it almost sounds like he was punishing. He's letting them do this. It's been unfair.
Right.
Kind of got to rebalance the scale. All right.
Yes, it's this weird mixture of like, he says it's because we need to stop the drug flow, but then 2 sentences earlier said, no, it's purely economic. There's nothing they can do.
Okay.
And then right after, again, he's talking about how large the trade deficits are. So it's a little chaotic in typical Trump fashion. And then the other thing, very briefly, so this is still right before they were scheduled to go in. He'd been pretty quiet on tariffs in other parts of the world so far, but he also started to open the can of worms into the EU whenever he was talking about this as well.
Are you going to impose tariff too on the European Union like you are going to do for Mexico and Canada?
Well, you're asking me a question because I'm sure you didn't hear. Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Do you want the truthful answer, or should I give you a political answer? Absolutely. Absolutely. The European Union has treated us so terribly.
So then he goes off talking about the same thing. They're ripping us off. They've been treating us so poorly. In typical Trump fashion, when someone brings it up, he answers very bluntly, and that's really it. Are you going to impose tariffs on the EU? Absolutely. And then he doesn't really give much more from there. So then the following day, February 1st, does roll around, and then we get 3 new executive orders imposing these tariffs with which he was talking about. So we've got 3 separate ones imposing duties to address the flow of illicit drugs across our northern border. Very similar thing at the southern border. And then separately, he says imposing duties to address the synthetic opioid supply chain in the People's Republic of China. You could scroll through this if you wanted, but it's pretty straightforward in terms of all of the details that he was saying before. So then at this spot, he's saying, I hereby determine an order, and then outlines the exact details of what these tariffs would be. First part is referencing that declared national emergency at the different borders, again, related to drug trafficking and some of the other things that he has said. 25% beginning on February 4th. Canada, there was an exemption for energy to be 10% on energy, but 25% on everything else. And then he also puts in this other little clause, should Canada retaliate in response, the president may increase or expand the scope of the duties imposed in order to ensure the efficacy of this action. So that's everyone's kind of expecting retaliatory tariffs. He was pre-baking in retaliatory tariffs. So similar to the Colombia thing overall, it seems it's coming out very strong. In his spoken remarks, there seems to be very little that these countries could do in order to avoid this outcome. So naturally, some of the leaders in...
I was just going to say, but Joe, we all know that tariffs are bad for the economy and the global economy. So why would Canada do something like this? Because, sometimes the political considerations outweigh the economic ones.
People are saying, as a result of all this, Trump looks like a bully and you got to stand up to a bully. And, you can't just totally roll over and, take it.
I think I was scrolling through
without fighting back at all.
Scrolling through X or something, and they had Jon Stewart up there saying how being friends with America's a really bad friend. I didn't watch it. I think that was the title.
Yeah, no, but I mean, acting in this capacity, it's definitely not friendly. So Mexico and Canada are our two largest, and then China as well. Three largest trading partners obviously have a much better relationship with Mexico and Canada. So yeah, it does raise the question, why is he doing this? And then the other point is that this flies directly in the face of his own trade deal that he signed in 2018, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. So just unilaterally, effectively, he just goes out and says, well, that trade deal doesn't seem convenient to me at the moment, so I'm going to impose these other tariffs and duties on these countries. And so it's done under the guise of this national emergency for drug flow. But at the end of the day, he's just strong-arming. And anything that he doesn't like, his first go-to is to impose more tariffs.
Yeah. I think, I do think, though, that there is sort of, and I looked into this really briefly, just to kind of get a sense of what all the hubbub was about. And the fentanyl crisis, or the issue, seems to be is a really big one. And, they're trying to call it a crisis. One of the framing of it, which I thought was quite powerful when I read it, was they basically said, more Americans are dying each year due to an overdose of this stuff than all the casualties, all the deaths, not even just casualties, in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
So it's happening every year in the U.S. because of this stuff. Now, it doesn't affect, I don't know anyone. I imagine, I'm personally not affected. It's not something we talk about. It's not part of my daily life. But when you hear it in those terms, it's like 70,000 or something died like last year. And there was like 65,000 or something Americans died throughout the entire length of the Vietnam War. Then you start to see it in like a certain perspective. And I can see why this has become, item number one.
Right. It's really a huge issue, and not only just that pure death count, which is, like you said, more than the Vietnam War casualties. That's pretty horrifying. But then the bigger effect as well is how these different things have contributed to communities themselves in the U.S., or lack thereof in some cases. So the close example I know is J.D. Vance himself. Just again, reading through his memoir, it's all about how basically the fabric of the community in Ohio, in rural areas, in Kentucky as well, where he grew up, have deteriorated. Here
we go, Joe.
Deteriorate. I can't even say that word.
Yeah,
so these communities. So
have they deteriorated?
Yeah. So these communities deteriorated.
There you go. Just take a little
over
slower.
The past couple generations here, and not only because of things like prescription drugs that have gotten people addicted, and obviously those that are killed. It's a terrible tragedy, but even those that aren't killed, you're still alive, but it kind of consumes your entire life.
Yeah,
it really
it's an
wreck
addiction.
everything you have. Yeah.
I mean, it's
So
an
if you've
opioid.
got large communities where a large number of people are being flooded with these types of terrible drugs, the fabric of the community itself is going to, maybe that's not the primary reason, but that's really going to accelerate the process of just bringing down these communities further and further.
I mean, I urge people to look into like what this is, fentanyl. I mean, I kind of looked into it briefly. It's opioid, painkiller. It's something like 100 times more potent than morphine, and like milligrams of the stuff, not grams, milligrams of the stuff ingested can kill you.
Yeah, I think it's like even less than that, like a tiny speck. If you're
there's a little speck of it on a finger that can kill you.
Right,
and
it's
that's
really
wild.
really dangerous.
And they're like putting it in other stuff, and so I think this is why he's pulling out all the stops. And to be fair, at least in my reading of it, kind of what you've shown me, the fact that the executive order lists the tariffs, we're opposing in tariffs specifically for, in order to kind of slow down this drug inflow. Right. As he could have written something else. He could have written sort of with that little thing that he was saying in response to the journalist, where he just kind of paddled off a bunch of stuff. Yeah. So he's playing a different game here. You can't totally follow it. You'll say it's economic. You'll say they're treating us badly, but get it.
But yeah, it was definitely strategic. On his first day in office, he signed this order declaring a national emergency at the borders based on this, and so a lot of what he's doing is relying on that going forward. Because again, this is it's in direct contradiction of his own trade deal that he put in place in 2018. But like we were saying, this fentanyl is a huge issue. So thus far, he's been using that as one of his major pillars to justify a lot of these actions so far. So as February 1st rolls around, naturally, the leaders of these countries are not too happy. President Sheinbaum in Mexico had this to say. She didn't come out and directly say we're going to retaliate, but was more measured in her approach and was encouraging dialogue to try to avoid these things rather than purely escalating the situation. Trudeau was a little more direct.
Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods as of Tuesday, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 21 days' time to allow Canadian companies and supply chains to seek to find alternatives. Like the American tariffs, our response will also be far-reaching and include everyday items such as American beer, wine, and bourbon, fruits and fruit juices, including orange juice, along with vegetables.
Anyway, so then he just starts listing out a bunch of...
I don't think I've actually heard Trudeau speak, at least not for an extended period. But it's funny when he's getting like super serious. He's talking about orange juice. That made me laugh. That's where I lost it.
Yeah,
we're gonna American beer, orange juice. I lost it.
So they were not so happy, understandably so, at all of this. China's response on the same day, they had a very measured approach. And, this is probably due in part to the holiday going on in China at the time. So in some way kind of catches them off guard a little bit.
Chinese New Year, yeah.
It's
the biggest holiday. Chunjie. And they didn't want to they didn't want to had a huddle, a late night huddle over some of the beer and the
some of the beer and orange juice. So that day they come out and basically just say that it violates WTO rules and they're going to file a lawsuit in response. And we hope we can work together. That's it. So 3 short paragraphs. That was it. So then moving in to Monday as the week began, everyone was waiting and watching for these tariffs to finally take effect. So in those executive actions that we were looking at, They were signed Feb 1, but then, formally going into effect February 4th. So also, as all these responses were coming out that day, Canada, 51st state.
Yeah.
He tosses that in here and there as well, and it's really difficult to tell.
Capital C, cherished.
He's got a very distinct writing style. It's like I can't think of anyone else who picks and chooses kind of random improper nouns with which to.
Me. I have that. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't do it this much. I mean, I usually do it. I know not to. I know not to put a capital in C in cherished, but I do have a problem with using capitals too much. But like, should make our own cars. I wouldn't capitalize. I know better than that.
Yeah,
but yes, he's got a
lumber.
I mean, maybe because. Anyway.
Cherished 51st state. That's great. No tariffs.
One thing about that actually is like he doesn't actually type these out himself. I mean, wasn't there some sort of video where you could see backstage of him watching? He was like drinking a Coca-Cola.
Oh yeah, there are some
and he
like
was
that.
watching,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he was watching like
Harris.
Someone. It was like a Harris rally
like
or speech
them.
or something, and he would dictate them. Yeah, and then someone else would type them up and send them. He would reread them. But like, is he putting? Is maybe he's not putting the capitals there?
Yeah, I mean, like he has to be indicating those capitals. Otherwise, it would be just like some random aide.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe this is exactly.
Yeah,
maybe it's the AIDS problem. We don't know.
No way. Yeah, I mean, at least for the last decade, he's been tweeting that way.
All right. Too much time on the capitals. This is like the second or third time I brought this up.
But in a way, that actually makes them even more impactful. Because not only is he not typing himself, he's dictating them and has to separately say, capitalize that C in cherished.
Yeah, it's just another way of just like throwing people off. Because you read it and you're like, why is it capitalized? Is this important? Is this something else I don't know? And all of a sudden, your head's filled with all sorts of misdirection. He's playing you. He's already in your head.
He's treating this very much like a reality TV show. Like he had that comment in that first video where he's saying, no, there's nothing they can do. And then he kind of went off on it for a little bit on, why he's doing it. But then at the end, he was like, they might be bigger. They might not be. We might get around this. We might not. We'll just have to see. He's just constantly kind of
unpredictable.
He's got something up his sleeve. Like he's got a narrative that he wants to spell out. Yeah. I mean, like he's saying key details for people to ask key questions about these countries. He wants the conversation to be on Canada and Mexico. Also, China was included, but their tariff rate was lower, only 10% instead of an additional 25%. But then even that, I think, was all part of this underlying plan that he has. So then lo and behold, on Monday, Trump holds separate dialogues with President Sheinbaum in Mexico and Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada. The result was, I don't know, maybe pretty predictable. So very similar to the Colombia thing, maybe not in just a couple of hours, but in a couple of days, this was pretty quickly turned around. So this is her original post. These 4 items that they struck, they struck a deal on with regards to these tariffs. So Mexico is going to send an additional 10,000 members of their National Guard to patrol the U.S.-Mexico border. Number 2, U.S. is committed to working to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons to Mexico. Trump wants to stop fentanyl. Sheinbaum wants to stop weapons coming into her country. And then this will be delayed for 30 days. So at this point, these are still on technically, but now the next date everyone's waiting for is March 4th instead of February 4th. And then similar later that afternoon, then he talked to Trudeau. Pretty much same thing, although he says nearly 10,000 frontline personnel and the appointment of a fentanyl czar, and then proposed tariffs for at least 30 days while we work together.
Yeah, I really appreciate the chance to kind of get into the negotiation room with them because, Canada didn't come up with the word fentanyl czar. And I'm surprised. I'm sure like whoever put together that post, they were sort of wondering, do we put quotes around fentanyl czar or do we just go with it? Because it wasn't their word. There's no way it's their word. Okay. That's funny. That was one of his demands. We want a fentanyl czar.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then just to round it out here, this is Trump's own thing, just saying the same thing. Fairness for all. So that's what he's secured with this, apparently. But then last piece is,
Yeah.
what did China say
What did China say
about all of this? So the Chinese Commerce Ministry on Tuesday, they announced pretty much instantly within minutes a number of retaliatory actions on their part. We're going to link below to some of the official releases detailing all of these things, but it was pretty wide ranging. It kind of covered a wide breadth of kind of topics, but wasn't as forceful in terms of the amount of goods in which tariffs are going to be applied. So in that way, it was more of a measured response from China on this. So they know a lot's at stake here. The Canada-Mexico agreements were going to go in place and then, were taken away at the last second. There was not similar dialogues going on with China. So I think they just kind of accepted that these things were coming. So some of the key points that they came out with in response is that they had a 15% tariff on coal and liquefied natural gas, 10% tariff on oil, and then a couple retaliatory non-tariff actions as well. So they're going to impose new export controls on certain precious metals. I think tungsten was a big one. I think China supplies like 80% of the world's tungsten, so they've got a bit of bargaining power there.
Yeah.
As well as
precious metals.
So other precious metals. And then the last thing they did was, so then they also issued a statement saying that Google is under investigation for suspected violations of China's anti-monopoly law. That one was kind of strange because Google is not even is blocked in China and has been, I think, for at least the past decade. So they came out with a number of these actions across a couple of different points. Not that intense, really not as intense as Trump's order was, but kind of saying something in response. So it seems like...
Really? I mean, so they're just saying, oh, okay, we're going to investigate them now? Or we're going to hit them with a fine, basically? We're going to start finding their companies?
Pretty much. And then the main thing, though, is that the tariffs that they imposed, I think the number is something like these 10 and 15% values that China listed. I think it applied to like $15 billion of imports. So it's a very small amount, relatively speaking. And then Trump's order is on an additional 10% across the board. So on all imports, or everything that the U.S. is importing from China. Yeah. And the figure in 2024, which we can link below, is that the U.S. imported $525 billion of Chinese goods in 2024. So they're imposing, effectively 10% on something like 525, and China is imposing 10 and 15% on a value that is less than 1/10 of that amount.
Yeah. But I don't think the tariffs, I mean, I guess a couple of reactions that I would have. One is, the tariffs on the incoming goods probably isn't where the sting is. I mean, it sounds to me like it's the export controls that kind of hurt. That's certainly the most worrisome. And China obviously knows that it's got bargaining power there, as you said. Mm-hmm. The other thing, just being like, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and fine some of your companies. I don't think that's something that the American can do in sort of retaliation. We just don't have that system here, I guess. You know what I mean? Like something.
Yeah, but a lot of the major.
The only thing you could say is like TikTok, for instance. But I think. I think the day that
that's a
huge
one.
That's a big one. You could at least hear the debate that happens. When Congress decides to divest it.
Right.
But no one's arguing for it to just like nationalize or just take it. They're saying we'll give you compensation. And let her know it'd be fair or not is a different question. But I think when Trump when he got into office, didn't he say that we're going to put a hold or kind of slow down the actual we're going to stop that from progressing.
Sale.
Yeah, the forced sale.
Yeah, the day before he came into office, like it passed across the board in Congress to basically force TikTok to sell itself to a U.S. entity or be shut down in the U.S. And it was like actually the night before he got inaugurated, like he already paused it. So I think
Right.
currently, like, he started a 75-day pause, and so this is about 2 weeks ago now. So we're looking at like 2 months remaining on this. Not a whole lot concretely has been said about it so far, other than Trump thinks he wants to make a deal, or
Yeah.
Trump's intention, or I don't know, at
To
least
make a
his
deal here.
preferred outcome at the moment, he's saying is that the U.S. should take a 50% stake in it as well. And so that was people didn't really know what he meant. One of the other executive orders that was signed recently was to establish a sovereign wealth fund for the U.S. actually. So
Yeah. And you kind
maybe
of
we
put
can
that
talk
into the
about that
sovereign wealth fund.
on another episode, but I assume that would play into it in some way as well.
Yeah. So that's interesting. But definitely there's a lot of chips here on the negotiating table between China
a lot
and
of different
they seem to be like
pieces
adding pieces here. So we have, all right, look, we got TikTok was on the table. I can go ahead. Are we moving forward with that or not? But then the last one, the last point, it's always, whenever I hear about retaliatory tariffs from China after the US does something, I always wince quite, severely. And we talked about this earlier on a previous episode, but if you just look at the tariff level that China's already right now imposing on US
for
goods,
decades,
it's huge. I mean, it's way high already. As opposed to vice versa. So they want to like pretend as though it's already even when like it's not. So that's like the reciprocity thing. But that always kind of gets under my skin.
Yeah, and so that's always how the media,
not to mention,
at least has characterized it. But I don't know, maybe we've just been making a conscious effort to stick to, just watching these actual interviews that go into place and just seeing what the actual politician is saying. But obviously Trump and JD Vance, they've been continuously hammering that point home, in that the U.S. has already been getting taken advantage of for many years. This is not starting a war. This is our long overdue retaliation. A lot of moving parts here. It seems much simpler for Canada and Mexico. They worked that out in just an afternoon.
Yeah.
I think in 2018, the quote unquote trade war that went on, I think it lasted like the better part of a year and a half or so. And I think it culminated in a new signed trade deal, I think at the very beginning of 2020, which then obviously the world changed forever shortly after. So we shall see this time how this whole big game show is going to unfold.
All right. Well, that's it for the Root of All Evil podcast. Thanks for
tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep
see you next
more
time.
coverage of this trade war, all of them, because there's like a 3-front trade war now or whatever. Anyway, till next time.
See ya.